So the talk today is how do we live in a world that we describe and we talk about? How do we live in a universe where we have this amazing power? We've talked about God as a power, as an energy, as a beingness in the world, not as something out there somewhere or someone out there somewhere. We've talked about how it works by working through us and by working for us, by working through us and by being operative in our thoughts and minds. And then the big question, and it's interesting, this question goes way back in philosophy, back as far as there's been philosophy, where at some point someone is saying, this is what the ideas are, this is the truth, how then shall we live? And that really is where we are today. How then shall we live? What shall we do? We say in this teaching all the time, there's a power for good in the universe greater than we are, and we can use it. A power for good in the universe greater than we are, and we can use it. But there's a flip side to that. There's a power for good in the universe greater than we are, and it can use us. Now, when I first heard that second part, I was like, no, I left that religion. I already been through that religion where God will use you, but you're going to have to suffer a lot first. You're going to have to give up everything that matters to you, and you're going to have to just, lay down your life because your life doesn't matter, but the only thing that matters is what we tell you. We being whatever the church idea at the time was. But that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about this idea that the power for good in the universe is something you have to conjure up, or that it uses us by turning us into something other than who we are. But rather, this amazing energy, this amazing power we call God, or spirit, or life, or infinite intelligence. That's a word I used to use a lot. I haven't used it much lately. Infinite intelligence. And we could use that. Well, how do we use it? There are kind of two sides to this. How do we use it, and how does it use us? So how we use it is setting intentions, a lot like what Maya was talking about. Setting intentions, positive thinking, creating these ideas within ourselves that we really believe in, and seeing them come forward and come forth into our everyday life. Most people who are listening to me at some point or other now have been through enough of this teaching, because I have a feeling from what we gather is that most of us who are participating here in our center are not new to New Thought, or we're not new to Science of Mind. So we know we've done the work. You've done your treatments and seen things change. You treated for prosperity and you saw it grow. You treated for health and saw that change and become different. I often tell the story that when I first walked in these rooms, I wasn't sure I was going to believe in any of it. I was pretty skeptical. I had been through some painful things with religion already. And so whenever they started talking about this thing called spiritual mind treatment, whatever that was, it sounded a little weird, like white coats coming to get you. But I decided to learn about it, so I bought a little pamphlet that said how to do a spiritual mind treatment, and I took it home and wrote a treatment that afternoon. I thought, I'm a bright, intelligent person. I don't need to go through a whole lot of classes to write a treatment. So I did, and I wrote a treatment around sinus trouble. It's interesting, I'm sitting up here sniffing now, so I guess telling the story I anticipated set myself up here. But at that point in my life, and I was in my early 30s, or somewhere in my 30s, I had never really breathed freely through my nose, even on medication. I mean, the medication would help, and sometimes I could get an opening so I could breathe through my nose. But for the most part, I had always had hay fever and sinus reactions and all this kind of stuff. And so I wrote a spiritual mind treatment, and I affirmed that my sinuses are lined with Teflon. Nothing out there in the universe does harm to me. There's nothing to do harm to me or that I could do harm to. All that I breathe in passes through me and into me in wholeness and fullness and out without causing any irritation whatsoever. I thought, if that don't get it, then this is a bunch of hooey, and I don't need to have anything else to do with it. So what I did was I wrote that down. I put it in the front of a little journal that I was using for daily readings, and I read it every day because I wasn't going to waste time on this thing. It's like this thing called Science of Mind, whatever it is. I was pretty skeptical. I was one of those people that came late and left early, so nobody could talk to me in the beginning. And so I read my little thing every day. And I was already into meditation then, so it was sort of related to that. And about 5 or 6 weeks later, I noticed that I had stopped taking any of the medication for sinus stuff. And then I also was aware that I was breathing through my nose. I would wake up in the morning and I could take a deep breath, and I didn't have to always breathe through my mouth, which meant I wasn't drooling nearly as badly on pillows and things. So I went, wow, there is something to this power for good in the universe, and I can use it. And I can use it for my own health. I can use it for health work with other people, which I've done much of as I learn more and more about the teaching. So part of the way we learn to use it is by learning how to think differently in a positive, powerful way. And that's all a spiritual mind treatment is. It's an argument with ourselves to talk us into something that we already wanted to believe anyway. It's also that I learned a lot about cleaning up my thinking as a way to use this power. Treating for that wonderful, perfect relationship, and then talking bad about anybody I thought might be available. Want a relationship that's going to take care of me the rest of my life, but rich people are not people to be trusted or part of or any of that. I mean, just all sorts of ways in which we contradict ourselves in our minds. I'm just throwing these out as examples, because those contradictions get in the way of allowing the Spirit, this one power, to do for us what we say we want. Because the only way it can know that is by what we believe in and what we keep saying to ourselves and believing about ourselves. So we begin to train and retrain our minds to know these truths, to speak the truth, to claim prosperity. And a lot of people in the world right now are struggling. A lot of people in this country are struggling because things are a little shaky. But you know what? Those of us in this country are so much richer than many, 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 many people in the world. There's some things online that you can do that can measure your income versus the rest of the population, and you see just how rich we really are. But even with that, to feel that richness, we've got to be able to see it and focus on it and appreciate it. And so by appreciating it, we activate an even greater, stronger idea of this good that we desire. And that power for good in the universe that is greater than we are says yes, because that's all it can say. That's why it's so difficult when you say, well, I want this, but I can have just enough. So that power says, yes, I want this, but I don't think I deserve it. And the power says yes. So we get that constant thing. So it's a really, in terms of using it, what I begin to learn, and what I learn and what I'm still teaching is the idea that we get clearer and clearer in our thinking, and that power activates in the world around us and brings those things into our lives which we are naming and desiring. Greater health, greater wealth, wonderful relationships, and rich opportunities to give our gifts in what people call work. Now, the flip side of this is it can use you. And as I said, it ain't a bad thing. It doesn't turn you into something other than who you are. It uses you. And the way you know how to volunteer for that using, for that divine power to move in you and through you and use you is, what do you desire? What's your passion? What's your heart calling you to? And it says, this universal power, there, go be that. Yes, that's what I want to use you to do. I want to use you to be an artist. I want to use you to be a singer. I want to use you to be a construction worker. I want to use you to be a happy person. I want to use you to do all of it. Or I want to use you to be a miserable person. You know, some people really enjoy their misery. I had an aunt and uncle who fought, dish-breaking, screaming fights their whole marriage. And when he died, I thought my aunt was going to be so pleased because she had called him every name I had learned, all the cuss words from them watching them fight. And you know what? She was devastated because she so loved and cherished him. But a big part of what she cherished was that somewhere where she could safely fight. And I'm like, well, that's a little interesting. Universe said, yes, I'll use you to be the one to fight. That's what you want to do. Didn't do harm to anyone but the two of them. Maybe their kids, maybe their nieces and nephews a little bit, but we survived. So it's saying, it's using us to be that which we want to be anyway, and what we like to have as our highest and greatest good. Another way that you can see how it's using you is as you allow yourself to grow through the stages of life and you emerge into greater and greater expressions of good, and sometimes different. The things that I thought were fabulous a few years ago, I'm not so keen on right now. I wanted to live in New York City when I was in my 20s. I thought it would be the hottest, fastest, most fabulous thing in the world. Well, in my 50s and 60s, I lived in Philadelphia. That was just down the road from New York, and I made a lot of trips up there to see plays and whatever. And I got very clear, I didn't want to live in New York. It was fine for me. It would have been fine for me in my 20s, but it wasn't fine for me at that age because it just wasn't a value I carried anymore. And so this divine energy moving through us didn't put me there. It didn't say, oh yeah, but you wanted this in your 20s, so you got to go do it now no matter what. Well, a lot of us get in trouble when we start thinking we have to carry those values and those desires over the various ages. And when we get to wherever we are, whoever we are, we forget sometimes that I get to choose now, today, who I am to be, not based on something I had in the past and never got. So this thing can use us by helping us to become that which we desire to be. So it's like a big loop. On the one hand, we're using it by declaring and claiming that which we want, and at the same time, it's using us by helping us to become that which we have declared. And it's a natural process. There's another part to this, and that is that whole, in that receiving and becoming, there's something called emergence. And it's that law that says, that spiritual law that says, we are already designed to become that which we desire to be our greatest good. It's already built into us. We don't have to make anything happen. What we have to do is align with it in a way that allows it and allows us to simply grow naturally into who we are. I learned this really young. When I first moved to my third school in the second grade, and I was kind of enamored by a couple of kids that sat on the front row. I sat in the back because I was the new kid and I was scared to death. But I thought, those are some folks I would love to be friends with. And through some magic that I didn't understand at the time, I'm sure I did it in my paying attention, but I had no self-awareness at that point. We became best buddies and best friends, and we're all the way through high school and still to this day. If I got into trouble, or if I needed some help, or if I needed to reach out to someone I know I could count on, one of those people would be it. And actually, there are a couple of people from those days. We don't talk to each other very often. We don't need to. We know that solid ground is there. How that happened? It just emerged, because it's a natural process for those kinds of things to go on. So here we have it. It's using us. We're using it. We declare our truth, prosperity, greatness, goodness, and all of that. Then my question to you and to myself, and this is the one that just knocked me out of my chair this morning as I was getting ready for this talk, because I thought, why am I feeling uncomfortable about speaking about this? And I realized, in some ways, given all that we have been through in the last 3 or 4 years, COVID, lockdown, you got to wear a mask, not going to wear a mask, all of those conversations and happenings, it's easy for us. I think it's become easy to lose faith, to lose hope, to lose the idea that these things really work. And we say the words, Ernest Holmes says in this chapter in the textbook that the biggest challenge we have in our teaching is that we can philosophize about it, we can talk about it, we can theorize about it, but where the breakdown comes is in the practice. And when you're being told by systems and the fears around health and the fears around all these other things that we're being hit with lately, how terrible it all is and how you better be careful and how you better listen to us and do what we tell you, it's easy to forget that these practices still work. That these practices still hold out the possibility, not just the possibility, but the absolute certainty of providing the lives that we desire. And maybe that's more of a confession than I need to be making, but I want to tell you that's what was holding me back from wanting to do this talk. Because I started to see the places in my life, I only have one, where I begin to tolerate some things that I wouldn't have tolerated 20 years ago, or even 6 years ago. I begin to tolerate some beliefs that there are things in my health that I have no control over. COVID, oh my God, we had no control over. They said stay home, and all of a sudden, all the traffic stopped in the metro Atlanta. I lived right next to one of the busiest streets, and it was amazing. I woke up in the morning that day, and it was quiet. No roaring traffic, and it was a strange new world. There's been a lot of written about how the animals came back out and things showed up differently and all of that over those years. And you all were here, you remember it. But something about having that freedom pulled away, as it seemed, has, I think, for many, many people in our country contributed, maybe our whole world, contributed to a loss of sense of personal power and individual responsibility. It was taken away. And I'm not making this is not a political statement about masking or not masking or gun carrying or not gun carrying, none of that. This is about back to our basic human beliefs about who and what we are. So I've made a pledge to myself to get back to these basic practices, to get back to absolutely standing in the truth that I always have, or I have for the last 20 years, that there's a powerful good in the universe and I can use it. But I got to do it. The old funny story. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Well, you take an airplane from Atlanta and you fly up to LaGuardia if you're not too lucky, and maybe JFK if you're a little more lucky, and then you figure out all the ways to get downtown to Manhattan, and then you get the buses and blah, blah, blah. But you know that's not the real answer. The answer is how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, 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 practice. That's how you get there. How do you get to that life of freedom, that life where you, regardless of what's happening in the world around us, that we feel alive and in charge and on top of things? How do we get there? Practice. Old-fashioned for some of us, if we've been around a while. Things like you start your morning by naming what is my ideal day today. Not what's going to be done and what's going to happen to me, but my ideal experience of this day. Today I want to have joy. Today I want to have freedom. My phone is responding. Today I want to have the opportunity to love somebody, to touch a life in some way. I mean, whatever that is for you. Today I want to get the dishes done without hating it. I mean, that might be a start. On some days it is for me. Start your day with an affirmation of what do I want to accomplish today, and what does this power for good in the universe do? It says, okay, we'll support that. And I'm going to move through you to become a better housekeeper, or whatever else your version of that is. And see, what's so important then is that we start keeping track in our minds and on paper of those times when that happens. When you declare your truth, you declare your desire, you recognize what you want to have a greater experience of, and then it occurs. One of the things that happens over time for those of us who've been in this teaching a long time is that it happens so much, it becomes kind of automatic. And we, quote, take it for granted, which simply means not paying attention to it and not valuing it for what it really is. And when that happens, we can not realize how much it is already going on. Think about your day today. Think about the last week. What have you declared as a good truth and a greater experience that you wanted to have for yourself that actually happened and showed up? When I ask myself that question, I realize, I don't think about that nearly as often as I used to. I used to pay attention. And boy, when I did, I had a lot of excitement and energy. Simple things like driving down the road and feeling a nudge to turn right instead of left. And then discovering something I'd been looking for a long time and didn't know that it was right there. It's like, wow, there it is. Been wanting to meet some people and get to know more people in my community. And yesterday, I'm going to the garbage with my garbage, and I throw it in, and I pick up my mail. And there are a couple of people outside that I see every time I walk to the garbage I've never spoken to. And I thought, well, Bob, you've been saying you want to meet these people. So I walked over and said hello. And I have 2 new acquaintances. Maybe they'll become friends, maybe not. But it started. And I normally wouldn't even note that. But preparing for this talk makes me stop and think and bless and say, this is good. Hallelujah. To use an old phrase I don't often. So I invite you, as we are coming to the completion of this Roots month, getting back to our roots, back to our basics, do it. That's all. Just do it. Get back to the basics and not just thinking about it and talking about it and theorizing about it, but do it. Write your daily affirmations. Read something every morning from some text or some idea that lifts you up and gives you a better idea of life. If something is calling to you that is for yours to do out in the world, go for it. Because you've got a power for good in the universe that is greater than you are working on your behalf, and it will take you to that place of your desire. I said that without doubt before COVID. And I let COVID doubt me turned me into some doubt over the last 3 years. And I'm standing before you today to say I'm done with that nonsense. So I invite you to join me in that. The only reason this room is not packed and we don't have them hanging out the windows is the rest of the world doesn't yet know how valuable and important this basic teaching is to changing our lives and changing our world. We do live in a world of magnificent people, in a world that can work for everyone according to their idea of their greatest good. But we got to make it happen and not just talk about it. And that's the truth. So help me. Thank you. You're wonderful. So am I. And so it is.